I mean, I did go for your job when it became vacant. But my idea about actually relaunching the company as an anarcho-syndicalist cooperative and moving to a giant behavioural science ashram in the middle of the Utah desert, I mean, they weren't ready.
They didn't go down with it.
No, it didn't. They kept burbling on about the shareholders or something. But actually, you came along then with a much better idea, I think, which is to relaunch the company as effectively, essentially, you relaunched it as a creative transformation company. And in a recent talk, you made this fantastic distinction between the sort of standard formulaic management consultancy McKinsey approach that they would recommend, for example, when revitalizing part of a city.
Yeah.
And you contrasted that with a much more creative alternative. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I think, look, Rory, I mean, WPP is fundamentally, we're a creative company. You know, yes, we get data, yes, we understand technology, but I think that's all in service of creativity. And really, you know, coming to our clients with leaps of imagination or vision or painting or designing the future. And one of the best ways that I've had of trying to explain what we do and how that's different from consultants, because I get asked that question a lot. And by the way, I'm a kind of recovering management consultant. I spent 4 years in one, and it's taken me 20 years to recover.
It's like being deprogrammed from a cult, presumably.
I know, exactly. Yeah. You work so hard, it is like being deprogrammed. Anyway, the best way I've got to explain it is the meatpacking district in Lower Manhattan. And let's say you're the mayor of New York, you want to revitalize it, and you go to, let's say McKinsey, and say, what should we do? They'd say, well, it needs incentives, it needs state support, you should build a new road, why don't you open a couple of schools, all kind of very sensible, logical things. But actually what happened was a group of people said, well, hang on, there's this disused highway, the High Line that goes through Lower Manhattan, let's turn it into a garden. And lo and behold, millions of people visited, every year. People spent $30 billion building Hudson Yard, and for hundreds of millions of dollars, or tens of millions of dollars, we revitalized a whole section of a city without any sort of government subsidy. Now, that, I think, is a sort of solution that people who work at WPP and Ogilvy and people like us in our industry come up with. And I think that's why, fundamentally, we're in what I would call the creative transformation business. And
it's a magical success. I mean, there's a hotel in what would have been, in a sense, one of the most unfashionable districts in Manhattan. I think it's called the Standard.
Yeah.
And
where you're going with the story.
No,
anyway.
I was going to stay there, and I actually I saw the prices, and I thought of the poor WPP.
It wasn't in the WPP procurement
in all good
policy.
conscience, I couldn't. It was so expensive. And I was going, hold on a second. You're paying something like $800 a night to stay in a place which was a slum 10 years ago. This is really transformational. Now, why is it that McKinsey and their ilk have so much success in terms of actually not so much solving the problems, but just defining them in the first place?
Well,
where does that come from?
Well, I think that consultants are great at saying, we're here, you're here and you want to get here, and we can take you on that journey, and breaking any journey down into 3 stages and very rationally getting you on that journey. But if you don't actually know where you're going, if you want to do something different, actually you need different skills. So I think that, yes, they're hyper-rational. Yes, they come to conclusions through analysis. I studied the spreadsheet and the answer 7.2, or analogy. 10 other companies have done this, therefore you should do the same thing. But in my mind, that leads everyone to the same answer. And we know we're in the differentiation business, right?
Yeah.
Right? We want to do something different, because if you do something different, you'll grow faster, or be more successful than somebody else.
And actually, there's probably a marketing reason for that, but also actually a resilience reason for differentiation.
Yeah.
That making businesses more and more similar, their obsession with cost cutting, actually is essentially...
universal banking, a good example, right?
Perfect example.
Of it all went wrong when everyone became basically the same. So I think that difference is more resilient actually as well. That hadn't occurred to me at all.
Well, it's intriguing, I think, because this idea of economies of scale, for example, is absolutely universal, and therefore making things bigger and more uniform and more commodified is regarded as an unalloyed good in kind of economic circles and probably consulting circles. But there's a huge downside to it. I mean, not least just in terms of the marketplace becomes more and more homogenized, I think.
Yeah, and look at, people invent more and more products, but we all know actually sometimes a smaller number of products can increase sales, right?
Yeah.
Too much variety confuses consumers. They get totally stuck. I sometimes look at our packaged goods clients and say, do you really need that many varieties? If there's only 3 iPhones or 4 iPhones, why do we need 20 different, scents of deodorants? I think people go down sort of too much complexity when simplicity. I remember one of our colleagues worked with Steve Jobs when he first went back to Apple, and he asked the team at Apple to put every single Apple device on the wall, and there were sort of 500 that they were working on in R&D. There were like 500 images, and he took down all but 20.
That's it.
Like, this is what we're going to do.
There was this huge pruning,
and certainly running WPP, the ability to simplify what we're doing has made us much more powerful as a company as well, I think.
There are a couple of problems I can see which are just asymmetries. One, it's much easier to make money out of a new metro line, because I imagine a consultancy could stick their blood funnel into that for the next 10 years, right? If you're building a new railway, okay, that's lucrative. Whereas the idea for the High Line was actually done by volunteers. It's far harder to make money out of ideas than it is out of kind of large-scale
maybe
projects.
Boris's Garden Bridge would have been the thing we needed in London.
It wasn't a bad idea, in fact, no.
It never got built, but I think Rob Riley, who just joined us as our global creative director, Rob was talking to us about the Fearless Girl statue, and look at the power of that, and the millions of visitors a year that attracts to Lower Manhattan. And actually, there was a move at some point to move it from its location, and they were able to resist by saying, no, if you don't want to have it in New York, we'll move it to London or Paris or Tokyo. And they don't know, it can stay. So I think ideas that capture people's imagination, that's what I think makes WPP special, makes our companies like Ogilvy special, and that's what I think we should be celebrating.
So there's a central problem, I think, with business rationality, isn't it? Which is if you can only license what you do in the future based on pre-existing data from the past, you're creatively limited. In fact, you can't really grow and you can't really differentiate.
I mean, there's that sort of thing in statistics, like the better you can model the past, the worse you are at
understanding the future.
Right? I think the other thing is, you've said, I've heard you think this before, that people think that only what is measurable is important, right? And the things that are immeasurable are unimportant. But actually, the things that are immeasurable are probably the most important things, right? Hence, we spend millions of hours optimizing media plans, but much less time worrying about the creative idea that feeds into the media plan.
Which has a bigger effect.
Which has a much bigger impact, right?
But it's harder to compile. I mean, I suppose, just 2 more things. I mean, there's a really interesting thing, which I only discovered yesterday, which is why I'm bringing it up now. There was a guy called, I think, Charles, let me get this right, I think he's called Charles Peirce, who's an American logician. And he made the point that most problem solving doesn't actually involve sequential thought. It involves a process which he calls, I think, abductive inference. Which is you notice something unusual or you imagine something different, and then you have to work out what the prevailing conditions must be for that to be normal. Now, that's what Darwin did, in a sense. This is strange, all these finches have different beaks. What would have to be true for this strange thing to emerge? But it always requires a leap of the imagination. And therefore, anything that doesn't allow for that leap is essentially basically flawed from the outset, I'd say.
I think we're in the imagination business. And, rationality is a great thing. CFOs are great things. But ultimately, we need people that can imagine and create the future. And we need to unleash them to do something and say, based on my experience, based on my judgment, this is the thing to do. You should call your business X. Your logo should be blue and not green. These are not things that you can determine by market research. They're ultimately people judgments and business judgments. And I think businesses run by leaders who can make those leaps of faith are going to be better businesses than businesses that are not.
I think I've got 1 more minute. I can't let you go without asking a question about the future of work within WPP and elsewhere. I make the point that unless our clients are Transport for London or the Duke of Westminster, we might want to encourage flexible working because it simply puts more disposable income in everybody's pocket.
No, absolutely. Look, in future, people from WPP are not going to come into work 5 days a week unless their name is Rory, in which case they will have to come in 5 days a week.
2% of the WPP
come into the office 5 days a week.
I thought it was an interesting measure of who's having an extramarital affair.
We're never going...
But anyway, sorry.
We're never going back to the way things were done before, but we're also never going to totally get rid of the office. And it's just we're going to have to muddle our way through, I think. And I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but I think everything that can be said on the topic has already been said in many respects. We'll just have to muddle our way through and trust our people to work hard, which there's no doubt they've done over the last year, right?
It's been
We
proven.
certainly have. We certainly have.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mark
you both.
Reed. Thank you, Rory, of course.